What is the mood among Democrats in the aftermath?
There's a lot of emotions. You know, folks are there's a lot of folks who are pissed, if I can use that word,
Yeah.
about how things turned out. You know, there are people who are calling for the heads of our leaders on both sides of the chamber, and folks that feel like there was no clarity on the exit, the off ramp, the exit strategy. So there's a lot of feelings and emotions, and then you pile on top of that the fact that we'll be back at this again in a couple months' time. And so Democrats are questioning whether or not we're, prepared for the next budget fight. But here's a similarity that I'd like to point out between 13 and this particular shutdown. And that was in 2013, just as this time around, both bases were itching for a fight with the opposition. And so I've always sort of assumed that a win for Democrats was to demonstrate to the leadership, to the members, their caucuses, as well as to the party apparatus at large, that they could put up a fight, that they could withstand the pressure of a shutdown and get something out of the deal. I think to a degree they did get something out of the deal. They got a compromise or an agreement from the Republicans and the president to move forward to negotiate on ACA. I think they're going to double down. They're not walking away from this. I just talked to Schumer just yesterday. They're not going to walk away from the fight. They're going to double down on it, double down on messaging around healthcare and the need to lower premiums and how it's exacerbating the tightening of people's pockets all over the country.
And they did put healthcare in the spotlight.
Absolutely.
Hogan, for Republicans.
And that's a win, by the way.
Well, as Republicans.
And they demonstrated that they could fight too, I think, to a degree, right?
As the dust starts to settle for Republicans, where's their head at, the party at large? Like, is this a win, or are there drawbacks, especially coming off of last week's election?
Well, I would say uniquely, in an odd way, I guess, somehow Republicans have come together in this fight. Typically, you see a lot of problems on our side of the aisle, in large part because by our nature, we're more individualistic. I would argue the other side is so tight on messaging all the time. This is maybe the one time there's been some divisions in recent memory. Republicans have the slimmest margin of majorities in history on the House side. So tackling just a few votes here and there, like literally 2 or 3 that could upset the entire apple cart, is a juggling act that the speaker, I think, has handled masterfully at this point. Leader Thune had some problems on his side, but I think the constant coordination between both chambers is also extremely unique. As you know, as you've covered it, the House wants to roll the Senate. The Senate wants to send things to roll the House. In this particular instance, they said, listen, this is what we can do. This is how we have to do it. They stayed on message. And I would argue coming out of this, the fight looks as though, in the public's eye, people don't like shutdowns. It upsets their way of life in so many different instances. We've seen that now with air traffic controllers and women, infants and children not getting their funding for their programs. So much of what we do in our daily lives are affected by shutdowns. But I think the Republicans stuck together in a way that I've not seen in my 25 years in politics. So right now, I think they're in a good spot. However, the looming fight ahead that Ashley pointed out is going to be about health care. There is no doubt about it. And so I think behind the scenes, I don't want to jump into the next topic without you getting there, but I think that's going to be where we're headed next.
You looked at your crystal ball here, because we will have there. But yeah, go ahead, Ashley.
I think Hogan's absolutely right. This is the first time I've ever seen Republicans from the top all the way down on the same message, on the same, working from the same playbook. And interestingly enough, this is the first time I've seen Democrats that were not, we've now gone through this process twice. They were not coordinated. I mean, just this past Sunday, Leader Jeffries was saying that they weren't going to cave, and within hours, the Senate caved. So it's like clearly these two sides aren't talking. And can I just say one other thing? I was in the war room for the 2018 shutdown, working for Speaker Pelosi as her communications director. And the way that we broke that shutdown was we did ground up pressure. We used, we put the pressure into the states, into the cities. We're telling real stories about the economic impact of the shutdown. And that's what applied pressure on Republicans. They respond to a ground up pressure, not a Washington, D.C. down. And so I think if I had to talk about strategy, we played our cards wrong as Democrats. We were in Washington, D.C. too much talking about process. They don't want to meet. They don't want to give us this. Rather than making the shutdown about the bad economic
agenda. To that point,
agenda.
let me just...
The longest government shutdown in U.S. history has come to an end. But that doesn't mean everything goes back to normal in the snap of a finger. While federal workers began returning to their jobs on Thursday, other storied institutions throughout Washington remained closed. The doors of the Smithsonian museums across the District of Columbia, normally open and free to the public, remained shut, including the National Zoo, which welcomes about 2 million visitors per year. Signs outside many of these buildings let potential visitors know that they were not open yet. However, the Library of Congress, which remained closed during the government shutdown, has reopened for visitors and researchers. Getting these institutions up and running again takes time, as workers are called back to their duties and management prepares to welcome back locals and tourists to experience history and culture in the nation's capital.
The stock market crashed right after the government shutdown ended, which is kind of weird, but I'm going to explain why. The US shutdown finally wrapped up after 43 days on November 12th, the longest in American history. And instead of celebrating, the stock market instantly pulled back. The S&P 500 dropped 1.7%, same with the Dow, and the Nasdaq more than 2%, with big tech names like Tesla getting hit the hardest. Even though the shutdown ended, investors were still flying blind because of all the key economic reports, jobs data, inflation numbers, spending updates that were delayed during the shutdown. On top of that, the odds of a December rate cut fell, killing the momentum that pushed us to all-time highs. Markets hate uncertainty, and ending a shutdown doesn't fix the fact that nobody has fresh data to guide them. So now that the shutdown is over and stocks dropped instead of rallying, do you think this is a buying opportunity or a warning sign of worse to come?
The longest government shutdown in U.S. history is finally over, but the ripple effects aren't done. Federal workers are still waiting for back pay. Air travel disruptions may linger. National parks lost weeks of revenue. And remember, this deal only funds the government through January 30th, so another shutdown threat is already looming. Michael Burry of Big Short fame deregistered his fund, Scion Asset Management, with the SEC this week. But he hinted at bigger things coming on November 25th, so mark your calendars. Here's your state of the markets in 60 seconds. The Dow smashed through 48,000 this week, its 17th record close of this year. Prediction markets are exploding. Robinhood CEO Vlad Tenev said it's the company's biggest launch this year and the fastest growing product in Robinhood history. On last week's earnings call, he said prediction markets are already on track to be a $300 million annual revenue business. Disney stock plunged this week after missing Q4 revenue expectations. Disney Plus added 3.8 million subscribers, but the entertainment division slid. CEO Iger's turnaround timeline is getting tighter. SoFi is officially the first national bank to allow crypto trading to retail customers. They paused it 2 years ago to secure their banking license, and now they're rolling out Bitcoin and Ethereum to 12.6 million customers by the end of the year. CEO Anthony Noto is calling it banking meets crypto in one app. And finally, good news, the IRS just raised 401k contribution limits up to $24,500 for 2026. And IRAs up to $7,500. A lot more happened this week, so don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date.
Okay. I'm gonna go back to this. So check this out, guys. So, does anybody know what happened? Does anybody know what happened after the government shutdown in 2019? The crypto markets went down a little bit lower, popped back up, and then a couple days later, we started to go up again. Does anybody remember what happened? Quantitative easing. Raul.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is facing the heat for how the shutdown ended. The longest government shutdown in history ended when 8 members of the Democratic caucus broke ranks to vote for a deal to end the government shutdown and extend funding until January 30th. Schumer is again facing calls from outside liberal groups and some House Democrats to step aside. Although Schumer didn't vote for the bill, he is facing the same pressure because he couldn't keep his caucus together. Senate Democrats have not been calling for Schumer to step aside, but they have been calling for new leadership generally in the Democratic Party. Senator Cory Booker said the Democratic Party needs to change. He called for a new generation of leadership more broadly. We'll be watching to see how the Senate Democrat caucus regroups. There's another funding fight coming up in January.
The FAA is keeping flight reductions frozen after the government shutdown ended Wednesday night. Flights have been cut due to staffing shortages, as air traffic controllers we know have had to work without pay, and many were calling in sick so that they could work other jobs and still get paid in the meantime. More cuts were planned until President Trump signed off on ending the shutdown Wednesday night. The FAA says it will monitor staffing levels as controllers start to receive their back pay. However, issues remain as about 600 flights have been canceled today.
Still,
it's still happening. They said it's not going to bounce back quickly. It's going to take a minute for all of this to sort of reset. So we'll see as we head into the holiday week coming up here. It looks like rates of high blood pressure in children have almost doubled since 2000. A new study out of China found that in 2020, around 6% of children and adolescents had hypertension, putting them at risk for health problems down the road. One of the authors of the study said childhood obesity has played a significant role in the numbers, and that number has spiked as well, along with consuming high levels of sodium, sugary drinks, and processed foods. I remember when I was little, we were not allowed to have soda. It wasn't in the house. It was just not something that we could have. And now I always see little kids like